So today is the first Sunday in the church year after All Saints' Day, and today we are celebrating All Saints' Day, in which we remember those in our lives, and especially in this congregation, who have died. It's right and good that today's lectionary readings remind us that though we are mortal, we are also eternal, created by God to live forever as resurrected beings in light and in love and in peace. Today we hear from Job and from Jesus about the reality, the fact, Jesus says, and the hope of resurrection. Poor Job. We all know the story. Miserable as he was, there was something inside of him that knew that this life, with all of its terrible trials, is not all there is. In the depths of his despair, when he wished he'd never been born or that he would just not wake up the next day, he gave a word that was inscribed, just like he said, on a rock, the rock of our scripture. He gave a word to the faith that resided deep within him. I know that my Redeemer lives. And at the last he will stand upon the earth. The Hebrew word is the dust of which people are made. And after my skin has fallen away, then, without my flesh, I shall see God. Job knows that there is life after this one. He gives word, ancient word, some of the oldest writing in all of our canon. He gives old, ancient, solid word to the truth of the resurrection. Even when this life is unbearable, and we might even want life to end, life does not end, friends. It never does. It begins again. Almost every culture that has ever been has had a concept of the life beyond this one. I believe that's because all people are created in the image of God, and all people have seeds of God's truth, and certainly seeds of eternity planted within them. I also observe that resurrection is so much a part of the natural order that people who live in nature cannot help but believe that they too will be reborn after they die. Seeds die when they produce plants. Plants and animals die when they're eaten, bringing life to people and to animals. People die, and their children and their grandchildren bear their physical features along with their dispositions sometimes and beliefs well into a future that they themselves cannot inhabit. Anyone who's paying any attention at all to God's created worlds sees resurrection everywhere they look. So people and their religions throughout time have reflected this primal belief that life does not end in death. It changes. There are people, though, who deny that life goes on after death. How sad. Really, how sad to believe that this world, with all of its disappointing injustices and gross violence, is all that there is. It really is sad. When I hear people in our culture say things like, when you're dead, you're gone, it makes me sad. Now, I know a lot of you spent some time in Sunday school in your early lives, and you probably learned, like I did at some point, that the Sadducees, a school of Judaism alongside the Pharisees in Jesus' time, were sad, you see, right? Because they did not believe in the resurrection of the dead. Today's reading features one of Jesus' run-ins with them, and during this run-in, they try to unravel Jesus' teaching on the resurrection and find themselves, of course, unraveled instead. The Sadducees invoke the laws of Moses regarding death and remarriage, a system intended not only to continue the dead man's family line, but more importantly, to preserve the status and the safety of the widow in her family. Widows at the time had no safety net, really, in society, and so God provided one because, newsflash, God cares about women as much as he cares about men. Even the Old Testament God. So Moses' laws for God's people often contain provisions like this for the protection of women. The Sadducees missed that entirely. And they questioned Jesus by applying this particular law of Moses hypothetically and, of course, absurdly, right? To try to belittle and make fun and to make Jesus' teaching on the resurrection of the dead seem silly. Whose wife is she then in the resurrection of the dead? As if Jesus is going to be stumped. Their question only revealed the absolute vacancy of their understanding of God. Where do we even begin with people like this? Clearly, they are blind to the obvious, where God's love, God's intentions, God's eternity are concerned. How do we open people's eyes to the fact that Jesus says that the dead are raised? How do we help people understand that we are only bound by the limitations of time and mortality for a short while? And that what seems important in this reality loses its relevance in the next reality. If the subject is enticing to you and you thirst for more, I'll recommend a book to you that Anne Stewart shared with me, and I devoured it. I couldn't put it down. It was called Imagine Heaven. It's written by John Burke. If you need more information on that, let me know. It's a bestseller, which speaks to the real need out there for people to give word like Job gave to their hope. Jesus explains to those who would try to outmaneuver him that there is no marriage in the resurrection because marriage is temporal and life is eternal. Everyone worthy of life with God is God's child. Children not of man and wife anymore, but children of the resurrection. Children of the resurrection. Eugene Peterson puts it this way in his Message Bible. Marriage is a major preoccupation here, but not there. Those who are included in the resurrection of the dead will no longer be concerned with marriage, nor, of course, with death. They will have better things to think about, if you can believe it. All ecstasies and intimacies will be with God. I love that. All ecstasies and intimacies will be with God. Life in the eternal light and love of God trumps it all. Jesus then goes on to teach us what Moses really had to say, not being used to unravel, but what Moses really had to say about the resurrection. God is the God of the living. And that to God, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all of the saints, friends, everyone that has gone before, they are alive and not dead. This silenced everyone in its hearing, at least for a time. No one had any more questions. But there is a question, isn't there? Of course there is for us. Are we children of the resurrection? Are we children of the resurrection? Do we worship the God of the living? Or are we oppressed by all of these gods of death? Do we see resurrection everywhere we look, or are we blinded by death? Is a zebra white with black stripes? Or black with white? Do we see endings or do we see beginnings? At the end of every yoga class, there's this time spent in a pose called savasana, which is translated, when you translate it directly, it's translated corpse pose. It's the final resting pose of the yoga practice. Or as I call it in my classes, it's our Sabbath pose. Usually we move from there into a fetal position on the floor to prepare for sitting up and going on with the rest of our day. We go from corpse to fetal to life. We practice our own little resurrection at the end of every yoga class. I have an instructor friend who says, while we're in our fetal position, every ending is something new's beginning. Resurrection, friends, everywhere we look. Which brings me to a personal note, of course. Many times when I'm giving the charge and the benediction after a worship service, I say something like this: the service is ending, but our service to the world is just beginning. Endings and beginnings. My friends, my time and service among you here at Santa Fe Presbyterian Church is ending this month. But every ending is indeed something new's beginning. There's something new for me as pastor of Old South Presbyterian Church in Newburyport, Massachusetts, of all places. And there's good news. There's something new awaiting you here at Santa Fe. Endings are not easy, and we should not sugarcoat them. Doesn't do us any good. Leaving you, leaving my parents, leaving my older children to answer God's call to serve people I hardly know in a place that is so far away is hard. But I learned something from Chet Cockrell long ago that has proven true in my life more times than I care to admit. He reminds us often that when you're wondering what the right thing to do is, choose the harder thing. The right thing is almost always the harder thing. Answering this call to serve the people in Newburyport, Massachusetts is hard. And it's scary, but it's the right thing. It means that things change. Change is so uncomfortable. Even when we're following God's lead into the new. But God is the God of the living. And we are children of the resurrection, not blinded by the ending, but hopeful in the beginning. My time among you has been a true blessing to me, true blessing. And I hope that you have found some blessing in my time here too. I will miss you. I will miss your children even more than I miss you. We shall grieve this ending together, as we should, briefly, and with great hope for the life to come. Because nothing's really ending. It's only changing. We shall live on, children of the resurrection.